Hey guys, Gary Lucas with Obsidian Painting here. I got a package in the mail today. I ordered myself some some paints to try out, as I want to kind of expand past Games Workshop. I love Games Workshop paints, but I'm finding that lately they're not essentially doing what I want them to. They're not meeting my expectations as much as I would like them. Some of the paints do, but a majority of them don't, unfortunately. So I've been looking to expand. So I got a couple things here. I know a lot about these paints, but I've never legitimately used them, like bought them and then just used them. So I decided to just get a couple little samples of each and then kind of do a comparison. You can probably already see most of it there, of just these three paint lines: Vallejo, P3, and Games Workshop. So just a quick run through. I got some Privateer Press paints, which are the P3 line, and I got some Vallejo model color and some Vallejo game color. So from what I understand, I'll do a quick history of all these. Games Workshop is the big boy on the block. I think their paints were originally made by the guys who do Coat d'Arms now. I've actually been meaning to try them out because I found that I actually really do like the older GW paint. So I've been checking out Coat d'Arms because I hear that they are essentially still making the exact same stuff as they used to. So I've been meaning to check that out because I like the heavy pigmentation. I'm a guy who likes pigmentation because when you thin down paint, the heavy pigmentation really goes a long way to making better blends. And I also just like the way it feels on the brush. You can control it a little more. But when there's a lot of medium in paint, and I've been finding this a lot lately in Games Workshop's paints now, that when there's a lot of medium, it's a little trickier to control, and it doesn't thin down properly. And so I'm going to go over the properties of all these. But so from what I understand, Vallejo was then selected to make Games Workshop's paints, but I think Games Workshop ended up choosing a different company. I don't remember who. I think it's the company they now work with in France, but I'm not sure. This is just what I've heard as well. I'm not 100% sure if this is correct, but and from what I understand, that's essentially what the game color line is because they were going to make the same paints for Games Workshop, and because Games Workshop bailed and Vallejo had done all this work, they decided to just make it themselves. They just changed the names, and that's why you can see a lot of colors that are very similar to Games Workshop. Now, once again, I'm not 100% sure if that's true, although it does sound legitimate. And then P3, they are essentially helped formulated by Mike McVeigh. Now, if any of you go back a bit in time, you can see that most of Games Workshop's models for heavy metal or heavy metal were painted by Mike McVeigh. And Mike McVeigh is, to be honest, he's probably one of the greatest painters of all time. I'm just saying. He's a really phenomenal painter. He does great stuff. And he had a helping in making these paints, which is really cool. And actually, they have the old GW paint pots, essentially, which is really neat. So let's talk about the different properties. I think I'm just going to show some Games Workshop paints, I guess. So let's talk about the different properties. And just so you guys know, that's essentially Games Workshop's new bottles. But the properties, let's go over that. So, there are two different things over here in Vallejo land, and that's game and model color. Now, from what I've read, these guys, thinner paints with an interesting medium, and because of that, sometimes the consistency of the paint isn't flawless or perfect through every bottle, so the consistency could change or vary per bottle. I honestly didn't find that with any of the ones I bought. All 5 of these have roughly the same consistency, and I think they worked really well. I'm just going to do that. Yeah, that looks a lot better. So, I found that their consistency was all roughly the same. And I actually really liked the consistency of it. In fact, I like it so much. Actually, I'll get to that a little later. But, so yeah, the game color is a little more robust. I found that it was a little bit tougher. I don't know how to really describe it, but this was more pigment, and this had a little bit more medium to kind of balance out how tough the paint was. So, going on to Games Workshop. Games Workshop paints are used to be really good. Like, this Midnight Blue is one of my favorite colors. I barely use it because they don't make it anymore. But, and that's actually the cool thing about Vallejo, is this Night Blue is the same color as this Midnight Blue. And Midnight Blue is no longer in production, but Night Blue is. I thought that was really awesome. So, I found that these guys have gone into a direction that I'm not really too happy about, because the medium side of it just kind of, I don't know, I think it kind of washes away the control and also the integrity of the paint, of the paint film itself. Because when you just put paint on something without thinning it down, paint is essentially plastic. It's made with an acrylic polymer, and acrylic is plastic. So when I talk about paint film, it's literally just the paint itself. But that's why sometimes when you let paint dry, it cracks. Because there's water, there's medium, there's the acrylic polymer, emulsion crap, and then there's the pigment itself. And, excuse me, I'm still kind of sick. But I found that these guys, they've been adding a little bit more medium than I like. I like pigment. Pigment is good. And, so when they came out with the foundation, I was actually really impressed, because these are really, like, the pigment ratio is so high, it's phenomenal, and I like them. A lot of people don't. I actually blend with them. A lot of people are like, why are you blending with these? I think they're phenomenal for that because of the high pigment concentration. And I just really like the foundation. Although, for doing glazing, it's not the best. It's really good for wet blending, and feathering and layering, but it's not the greatest for glazing, which is a majority of my technique when I'm painting really nice figures. So stuff like this, and actually the old Lich Purple, what color was that? Nauseating blue or something like that. Yeah, nauseating blue. It's kind of like a purpley blue. It's going to show up a little more blue because of the whiteness of this, and it's stupid. But it's like a purpley blue. And yeah, I'll try and do this. Maybe that'll correct the color. No, not really. But the pigment concentration in that was really high, and I really like that. There's not a lot of medium, and that's when you get down to the bare bones of paint. You need pigment. And I don't know, I think they're going down a road just to be cheaper, because it's cheaper to buy medium than it is pigment. So, whatever. And then I got some P3. Now, these guys use liquid pigment, which is really just another way to say they predisperse the pigment. So what that means is before they add the pigment to the acrylic polymer emulsion and the medium, they actually let it sit in water and just float around for quite some time. And what that does is that really helps the pigment join up with everything else. I could be wrong in the way that they're using the word liquid pigment, but from what I understand, that just means predispersed pigment. But they could have come up with some weird new technique or something that I'm not aware of. So, essentially, this paint doesn't really separate. I have, in the time that I've seen these or used this, it is not separated at all. You can still see a little bit of, like a tiny bit of separation on there, but that's not, like, that's like nothing. That's like done, problem solved. Okay, just shake it a little bit. And I didn't actually get a red of these, because I should have, because the comparison I used was blues and reds, and I didn't get a red P3, but whatever. So let's get on to the actual comparison. So I'm going to move these out of the way. I'm going to show you this. So, right here, I have the first 3 blues I tested. So, on your right here, this is Regal Blue by Games Workshop. Okay? So it's Regal Blue by Games Workshop. If you look, you can see there's a lot of tide marks. It's really splotchy. It doesn't really stay consistent throughout the brush, because I essentially dotted and then did this and then moved it up. And as you can see, it didn't really stay consistent. It didn't have an even pattern. It was really dark, and then all of a sudden it's like tide mark right there. So you can see that. The second one is Imperial Blue, I think it was. Yeah, Imperial Blue by Game Color. And as you can see, I was actually really impressed with this, because as I went up, you can see it's a completely even transition. There's no tide marks, there's no splotches. I was really impressed with that. And then over here, this is the Signar Base Blue. Now, this isn't actually a very good comparison based upon Regal Blue and Imperial Blue. It's a little lighter. It's more like Mortium Blue mixed with Regal Blue for Games Workshop. But as you can see, it has a little bit of graininess. And it's not very even as I went up. Right about here, it kind of got a little tide marky-ish. And then it kind of evened itself out. But with this kind of consistency here, as you can see, it always evens itself out. But I was mostly concerned about this area, because that's the area of going from paint into really thin down. And there wasn't really a lot of consistency. It got a little grainy, and I didn't like that. But overall, the pigmentation of this, I tried painting some models with it, and man, both of these colors, the Imperial Blue and the Signar Base Blue, they got the pigmentation going on. They'll cover that surface in a really nice coat of paint. It won't be splotchy, and I was really, really impressed. Yeah, that's all I can really say about that. This would be good for layering, the P3. So would the Imperial Blue, but I think the Imperial Blue is going to be terrific for blending. I cannot wait. So coming over here, I got 3 more blues. I decided to just grab some more. So right here, we have Necron Abyss, which is a foundation paint. And as you can see, it was actually quite consistent, but it also had some graininess. There's a lot of weird tide markish stuff in this area. You can kind of see it. Kind of goes up and then kind of does this weird funky thing. I wasn't happy about that. And then coming over here, this is Midnight Blue by Games Workshop. And as you can see, it was quite grainy as well around this area. Didn't really like that. And then this was Night Blue by Vallejo Game Color. Now, I actually did this one twice because this time I kind of screwed up the brush stroke. But as you can see, there's actually a nice kind of consistency once it's thinned down. But in this area, it didn't really like to blend too much. But right here, I did it again, and this is mostly brush stroke. So as you can see, it did have a nice transition. If I had done my brush stroke a little bit better, it probably would have come out quite smooth. So overall, blue-wise, Vallejo definitely has it in the bag. The P3 was great, but I wasn't too happy with it thinned down, to be honest. But we'll see. So now, coming up here to the reds, I tried out a bunch of different reds because I was trying to mostly match them, the Vallejo colors, to Games Workshop colors. But the ones I got, I couldn't really find something that was exactly the same color. So we'll just talk about what I did. So over here, I have Blazing Orange. And the reason why I did that is because the Vermilion color by Vallejo is kind of like a mix of orange and red, but the Games Workshop doesn't make a color like that, so I just used Blazing Orange. As you can see, it's similar, but it's more orangey. So this kind of spread out evenly, but let's see if I can get close. There's quite a graininess to it. Okay? So this is Blood Red. As you can see, as soon as I thinned it down, just a tiny bit, it all of a sudden lost most of its pigmentation, and that was not cool. Bad Blood Red. So I also threw in Red Gore, and as you can see, it's not very consistent. It's tide mark, yada yada. Not very cool. Same thing with Scab Red. It had a nice transition, but then as more water kept going in, it started not being fun. This is Mechrite Red, I believe, and it was actually quite smooth. The high pigmentation in it is great, but there's a little bit of graininess, which I didn't really like. So you can see that. Yeah, so there's a tiny bit of graininess. But I'm okay with graininess because with thin down paint, as long as it's you have a good primer application, I'm okay with the graininess because more coats will even that out. So this is the Vermilion by Vallejo. And it actually went from the transition of thick to thin, so thin down, quite nicely. It had a weird little tide mark area here, but I don't know. It was kind of weird. I wasn't a fan of this color. I did try painting something with this. Wasn't a fan of the Vermilion, but overall, it's still much better than Blood Red or the Blazing Orange. I also got Flat Red, which, as you can see, doesn't really match up quite well with any of these colors here. And it's actually a really bright red. It doesn't entirely look like a bright red, but and it's really nice. It was a really nice red color, and it actually did a very nice transition. There's a kind of like a spot here that looks bad, but that's actually just me pulling the paint up. Yeah, see, I just did that. But so really, this one starts about here and kind of goes up, and it was actually really nice. I really liked the Vallejo model color. And then this was the burnt cadmium red, which this is a beautiful color. And Games Workshop doesn't really make anything like it. I was looking, I was like, maybe Dark Flesh, but Dark Flesh was way too brown. Didn't even compete in this area. So, man, I love... Essentially, my verdict is that Vallejo pretty much kicks ass. And kicks ass, takes names. And, yeah, I'm either going to be restocking everything with game color or model color. Maybe both. I'll probably buy both because I'm weird. They also have an airbrush color, but I don't have an airbrush, so I didn't really see a need to buy any. But that's not to say I won't have an airbrush in the near future, or may just experiment with the paints. So I really like these. They remind me of the foundation paints. So I don't know. I'll experiment more with these to see what I can come up with, because I hear they're really great for glazing. But we'll see. And I bought some of my favorite colors, essentially. I like blues, I like reds, and I like greenish blues. Bought Troll Blood and Arcane. But, yeah, so essentially, Vallejo is probably one of the best companies out there. To show you an example, yeah. So you can see the head there. Hold on. So you can see the head. That was painted using Mechrite red up to blood red. You can see there's a little bit of splotchiness. Get out of the way there. So there's actually a little bit of splotchiness to it. It didn't come out right. It was kind of weird looking. But then over here, the tail, I just repainted using those Vallejo reds I got. Get some light in there. Yeah, there we go. So the tail actually came out much more natural looking. And the highlights, I think, were really nice. It's probably hard to see a little on camera, but yeah, you can see essentially that's what it looks like, yeah. And that took at most like a minute just to paint that tail. And it looks pretty nicely blended, I think. That's the cadmium up to flat red and vermilion. Just a little bit of vermilion because I'm not a huge fan of orange and red together. I really liked it. As I said, a minute. The pigmentation was terrific. The control of the paint was terrific. I'm going to be doing a lot more with these Vallejo paints. Alright guys, more to come.